began as a photographer. I studied in Wellington at Massey, and then I went on to become an advertising photographer for quite a few years. And then it wasn't until I came over to Melbourne that I got sort of little inklings of this other world existing and sort of making work purely for sort of experimental or for its own reasons, that I started making my own images in the first series I made, which was a great moment. And I think it also perhaps was the result of I found it hard to find advertising work here also. So I guess searching for new avenues, if you're not sort of making commissioned work, I sort of still felt the urge to really to want to create. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, right. So did you were you interested in fine arts when you initially trained as a photographer, or was it? I mean, was it more that you just felt the urge to create, as you say, like more when you moved over and there was that space to fill?
I mean, I did always have an interest in the arts, but not. It wasn't never at the sort of forefront of my interests or of my life, and I never. I mean, I go to sort of the big museums and things, but I didn't really know that many artists, or I mean, at that point in time, I was quite driven to make a living as a commercial photographer, and sort of focused all my energy into that, which was great in terms of learning and technical, and gave me a whole bunch of skills which I sort of carried on into those initial sort of series of images that I began. Maybe it was in 2008 or so. I think I made my first series.
Yeah, I think I feel like I maybe saw them first at the Melbourne Art Fair. Would that be?
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first series. It was cool.
Yeah. I mean, they were pretty stunning works, and they were quite kind of elaborate constructions. Like in terms of that, was it like how much of it was done as in a way like setting up a scene and shooting it versus constructing it afterwards, like digitally?
I mean, I always try to do as much in camera as possible. It's just far easier in the results you get. But I mean, and probably for that series, I think all the ones that you saw at the art fair, I think all were in camera.
Wow.
But then as things sort of developed and progressed, and you sort of maybe as ideas get a tad more elaborate, then I'd sort of have to be like a sort of puzzle and sort of combine a whole bunch of different elements together. So I guess but they all have always been sort of constructed or making rather than just taking. So those initial photographs, sort of friends, kids, we'd go to landscapes, and I'd take props and lighting, and so it was always a construction.
Yeah, right. Because obviously, as your work has progressed, there has been increasingly objects in the physical world, like constructed objects. So is it almost like taking some of the elements from those photographs and then presenting them in the flesh, so to speak?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's how because there's a point in time I was making a lot of costumes and then constructing props, and then in one image I made a sculpture that stood in a landscape, and sort of had great joy in that making, just as is, without the photographic element. I think that kind of led me perhaps to combine the two into that sort of pathway into sculpture.
Because some of the more recent work that I've seen has been carving. Like, it looks like very detailed and highly skilled. How have you developed that set of skills? Is that something that's come with you from a previous life, or is that?
No, I don't know. My grandfather was into carving, but aside from him teaching me as a kid, I never picked it back up until recently. But I love carving, and I love the time that it takes and the engagement with the material, and also working quite a sort of intuitive approach, and not sort of having a sort of end goal in mind, and letting things sort of change and morph. I really enjoyed that part of carving, perhaps in contrast to some of my photographs, which were in some parts they're quite elaborate setups and involve like a lot of logistics, but to have a process where it's very hands-on and sort of labor intensive, I enjoy that.
Yeah, and so the form is dictated more by the process of making, rather than something being pre-planned.
Yeah, and then I guess letting things unravel.
Yeah.
And hopefully you get some surprises. and then hopefully it works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. Yeah.
It does look like they're working pretty well, and it seems like the carving has tended to be more, I guess, I mean, organic forms and fluid. Like literally, there's like seascapes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been drawn to, well, sort of the seascape and whirlpools or eddies, which and even I'm sort of making a couple of new ones, which I'll be showing at NotFair. And I do like the idea of the whirlpool is, I guess, like we said, it's something in continual motion or a state of becoming, like transforming from one thing to another, attempting to sort of convey that in these recent sculptures. Hopefully it works.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the fluids kind of thing, whether in motion or still, has been a recurring motif throughout your work for, well, since 2008 at least. Because I'm thinking, obviously, there's those kind of figures in the water kind of images. Then of course, the roller coaster that was sitting actually on oil, right? Not water, but kind of it had that reflecting effect.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look back and without thinking about all the things that you're drawn to, and that they do reoccur.
Yeah.
I mean, water and trees have been two major things that have always been like a part of the photographs and now sculptures, and even these new photos I've been taking, it sort of now I've sort of removed the human element even more so and just focused on trees.
Mm-hmm. And there was that work you had in Canberra, right?
Yeah.
Which was a tree made of looked like chain or metal.
Yes, stainless steel chain.
Right.
So hopefully in its ideal form, and it will find a permanent home and plant a sapling in the middle, and then obviously the sapling will sort of overshadow this porous skeleton around it. Yeah, that's hopefully that happens at some stage.
But that's another work that's it's currently sitting in water, right? It's sort of in a water feature or something in Canberra. So
it's in the fountain.
Yeah. So that kind of steel mesh in the reflective liquid is kind of reminiscent of that roller coaster work in a funny way, but almost opposite symbolism in a certain sense. This organic form versus that highly structured form of the roller coaster in the oil versus the water. Of course. Yeah. Are those dichotomies things that you're interested in teasing out in your work? This relationship between the constructed and the natural in that sense? Yeah,
definitely. And I think I'm trying to, I guess, reconfigure my notion of nature. But I guess there's that for a long time, perhaps. I mean, I'm still drawn to visiting sort of faraway landscapes that it's sort of devoid. Well, nothing's devoid of human or cultural presence, but without humans. But then sort of green spaces, but then which is not the definition of nature, because it's sort of inclusive of the motorways and the roller coasters and the oil and the concrete. And so I guess I have been thinking of them as nature culture as obviously being one, and the notion of sort of the web of relations, that there's a relationship that defines a thing, and nothing is a separate, like this is Wilson's Promontory, this is nature. Yeah, so I've been thinking about that a lot, which I guess comes back to that idea of things, this fluidity of or porous nature of one thing into another.
No, I think that's really, really interesting territory. This, well, it's almost the paradox about the human being human and having this sense of being separate, but at the same time aware of the fact that you can't be separate. It's kind of a conundrum. The work that you showed, that was the coffin. Is it fair to call it a coffin?
Yeah. Everyone does. So.
Yeah. What the title of that work was?
Lux Demonstrat Umbra. The shadow reveals the light.
Yeah.
Took that from a philosopher, Raymond Tallis. Yeah, he's wrote a beautiful small book.
And what is his meaning when he uses that phrase?
I think I got that from an essay on, he's talking about wonder. He's talking about wonder, death, and sort of boredom being this inexplicable loss of wonder for the natural world. Yeah, and in that work, I guess there's a journey of sorts, and another morphing, and it starts with a water ghost. Did you go in? Did you go inside?
I didn't get to go in. No, I mean it was like a queue that was it was around the room.
No, I was really, really pleased with that work. It was
Mm.
a sort of long time in the making.
And you worked with a number of collaborators on that as well,
Yeah,
which I know you've done with a few of your projects. That's not the only occasion, but for this one you worked with an animator and a composer, right? To
yeah.
the whole thing.
And then obviously that I work with the fabricator to build the structure, and yes, it's just a lot of moving parts.
But I was thinking about that in relation to the separation of the human from the nature, and that you know, the transition, obviously the transition from life to death that's suggested by this coffin object is pretty fundamental to that. And it's also one of the fundamental moments when a human might be aware of transitioning into a thing as opposed to a person. That's going to fundamentally change your relationship to the universe, right? It's you know, the ultimate transition, really.
Indeed. I guess I hope to use it as a vehicle to sort of enlist sort of wonder, or sort of an enchantment for the everyday, and to have a state of, I don't know, to pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the aspect of art that makes us pay attention or changes our relationship to the world is kind of the crucial thing. We always need something, I think, to you know, bring us into our own minds. And that's a critical part that art can play in the world. Yeah. It's like changing your state of consciousness. Yeah, and it's a really important thing for people to do.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's art is a great vehicle for that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're continually exploring and curious. You can be curious about everything. It gives you a reason to search for all these other things, and to pay attention to whatever it might be, trees, concrete, not just like a superficial attention, but like honing in on things. It can sort of enliven the everyday.
Yes, absolutely. And that term enliven, I think, is critical. It's like you become aware of the latent consciousness of these other objects in a certain way. The hint of panpsychism that you can get.
I've been reading a bit about animism, I guess, talking about that, and I guess this idea of assigning personhood to all things, and sort of a sense of agency, and that things affect us just like we affect them. I think it's a great way of seeing or being in the world.
Yeah, completely, and an interesting time to reflect on those things while, you know, the bulk of humanity is being very affected by a non-human agent. And you personally, of course, have just had a baby, so that is a very affecting someone's life.
It's she's aged me. No, she's been wonderful.
That's great. Do you think that that has changed your artistic practice or your outlook on it at all?
A recent project, we've been photographing the same peppercorn tree like in early morning, but I would take River for a walk in the stroller because she wakes up really early, and photograph this tree, which has sort of grown into an archive of photos and been quite a wonderful project that we've done together in a way, which I think is then also photographing that the peppercorn tree has, that paying attention has then grown into my sculptural works as well, and sort of the forms, the organic forms that I carve.
On that peppercorn work, I've seen some of these images on Instagram, I think, right? And some of the photos don't look necessarily like immediately recognizable as a peppercorn tree, or some of the images. Is this right? Like they sort of look like somewhat abstracted or composite or something like that?
Yeah, I began by photographing like still images of the tree, like wide shots, and then I'd focus on the bark and then the peppercorns themselves. And then slowly, I guess I started thinking of this notion of where, perhaps what we were talking about before, but where the tree stops and the other beings begin. And then that kind of led to my wanting to photograph it in a more fluid form, so in motion, so the boundaries become literally blurred.
And
even so, in a lot of images, there's obviously houses and street lamps and trams, which then becomes sort of entangled with the branches, and it's perhaps that, what we're talking about, nature and culture sort of blurring or coming together. I found it quite more exciting to not know as well what I was going to get in making the photographs each time. I mean, I began at that stage by sort of be long exposures and tracing the sort of branches, and then sort of following, if there was a breeze, I'd sort of follow the movement of the leaves. Those sort of movements of moving with the tree led to that sort of abstract form, which I guess if perhaps if I didn't tell you it was a peppercorn tree, you may not even know. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting, because it sounds from what you're saying there as though what you were saying before about your process of carving and being guided by the making of the work is feeding back into this other aspect of your practice as well, which is quite nice, given the this conceptual idea of the tree both influencing the world around it as much as it is being influenced. So on many levels you have this two-way flow going through the work. I think it's really interesting. I wonder if you've read Peter Volleven's The Life of Trees. Have you come across that book?
I think I have read that a little while ago.
I might have recommended it to you, because I actually recommended every person I've spoken to in about the last 3 years. So I might have said.
It's a good book. I mean, and it seems like recently there's really been a surge. There's been a lot of books about trees, and which has been wonderful.
There's a new appreciation for all the different aspects of non-human life, and finally, plants in particular are getting some recognition for their inner existence, which is I think really pleasing.
Definitely. Not just resources at our disposal.
Exactly. And I think a project like you're saying, where you take your time with a tree, you enter into a form of communication with it, which is like a really lovely thing to be able to experience. But it's the sort of thing that because a tree operates on such a different time scale. It's the kind of thing you'll only experience over time. And I guess with your work in Canberra, that's a similar conversation that you're setting up there, right?
Obviously, if I plant a sapling, then depending on the type of tree, but it will take 20, 30, or hopefully a long time, which is quite a nice notion that if it goes ahead in 100 years, it could be there.
An evolving conversation between you and the tree, mediated by your artwork.
Yeah, so hopefully that, fingers crossed, finds a good home.
So you mentioned before some work you were looking at for NotFair.
Yeah, so I mean, it started 2 carving works. One of them I began sort of making all year, then had to sort of put on hold when I couldn't have a studio in Eltham, so I couldn't go there. So I've just recently been able to go back. Yeah, so I guess it's another similar to the sort of ocean or sort of whirlpool forms, but it's not finished, but it will have sort of 4 sort of quite fragile legs supporting this large sort of tumultuous eddy on top. Yeah, I mean, I've still got a bit to go on that, but happy so far with how it's going.
I really look forward to seeing it.
I'm excited about NotFair.
Great.
I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's particularly, a lot of people will be starved for like going to shows and meeting people in real life as well.